Before we get started, I'm going to invite Chris up here really quick. So half of tonight's proceeds go to the Fire Safe Council, which is very near and dear to my heart, and hopefully to all of yours, because it's intricately intertwined with water. And so, Chris, do you want to tell them a little bit about what we've been doing and the good food served at your house?
That's right. It's all about the lunch I give the working group. From the Thomas Fire and from basically the fires of 2017 and 2018, we learned a lesson that we were not as prepared as we thought we were. And we also learned that communities themselves, and not just the public safety agencies, need to be more involved in their preparation for, in their response during, and their recovery after any major wildfire event, and for that matter, any other natural disaster. Doing that, with that in mind, the Fire Safe Council has embarked on creating a community-driven, community-focused plan, strategic plan to mitigate fire risk and make Ojai more resilient. That is to be complementary to and coordinated with the Ventura County Fire Department's unit strategic plan. To begin that process, which is currently being funded by Edison and the U.S. Forest Service, we are creating what we are calling a roadmap. And that roadmap is basically the plan to create this larger, comprehensive, holistic plan. We have a working group that's been formed to do that, in which Andrea is a member of that working group, and they're meeting diligently to do that. And Fire Safe Council has a food budget under this grant, so we utilize that. So the roadmap will be finished in draft form in the end of November, though the grant period actually extends beyond that, but we have some important grant work coming up that's going to fund the second round, which is implementing the roadmap. So we are working diligently to get that first draft done. Then I'll end with the fact that as part of the process, because this is to be a community-driven plan, we're looking for community feedback. So we've put out our first of a series of surveys, online surveys. That is described in that poster on the tripod in back, and there's a handout that has a link and a QR code on it to take the survey. So if you're a resident of the project area, which is basically from Casitas Springs, Foster Park, up to Steckel Park on 150, up to 33, and out toward the Lake Casitas. So if you're within that area, we would appreciate you going online and completing the survey. You can take a handout with you. It has the link on it. And obviously, the more surveys we get completed, the better and more useful the data is. And so with that, I will hand it back to Andrea. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So the first thing I want to say is I live here. This is my home. And water security and climate security is really near and dear to my heart. And coming from my background, I read things probably in a different way than most people do. So I'm hoping to share some of that with you today to understand the urgency of change. And as my friend Meg has told me, we can no longer hide and be so polite about things. It's time to tell the truth and to be very straight with people about the things that we're about to see and what's coming. But I'm going to start a little bit lighter than that. So why is water important to me? My grandparents had a ranch in Wyoming that my family homesteaded. And my father, who's here today, is also from northern Wyoming. And in Wyoming, you don't have easy weather. It's very extreme. It's very dry. And so the people who homesteaded there had to be very good about being self-reliant and resilient. And you can see in there, that's one of the windmills that was used to pull up water for feeding the cattle. They had a cattle and wheat ranch. You can see my grandfather, and he was about 6'3" or so that's very tall wheat that you can see there. And that's dry land wheat farming, so they didn't irrigate that. And then you can see my grandmother who shot a coyote. And, it was not an easy lifestyle, but, I come from some rough stock. And my dad down on the far left with his buddies, and he tells me about a world that was a different time, where they used to take their shotguns to go hunting and walk across the airport. So if you can imagine that time. And then my mom and my dad on the right-hand side there, and then that little guy right there is actually me taking a nap on the farm. So, some of my passion for nature and for understanding how we can be resilient comes from a long line of people who have been resilient and have lived very comfortably with nature. So I promised I'd do a little bit of it, and it's a lot. So I did my undergraduate work, which most people don't know, in horticulture science at Purdue. So my background is plants. And actually medicinals and aromatic oils has been where my passion was as a young student. And my PhD studies are actually in agriculture as well, which most people don't know about me. They think I'm all ocean all the time, but I have a very settled background in agriculture. And I got my PhD in Sweden at the Swedish Land-Grant University, and I was studying plant lipids, so, very nerdy things, and the pathways that were forming them. And then after my graduate work, I came back to the United States to help my mom out, and I ended up working with doing a postdoc at UCSB. And I worked with nanoparticle toxicity, looking at very fine particles that are in our everyday products, including like whitening agents like titanium dioxide that you see in milks and sunscreens. And then the economy crashed. So I was like, I was going to be an academic professor. What am I going to do with my life? So I veered off. I saw Jean-Michel Cousteau at a rock concert. And I decided, he's really cool. I want to do what he's doing. So I walked into his office the next day and I said, I'm bored, give me something to do. And Jean-Michel looked at my very hard academic resume and he's like, why are you here? And I'm like, I'm bored. So I started developing environmental campaigns and learning about communication and talking to people and talking about very tough scientific topics, but translating them into easy to use fact sheets and communication pieces. And he taught me a lot, and I got to go to some places most people don't. I've been to replacing him at UN conferences, and I've met the head of the UN in Paris. And, his introduction of me was interesting. He introduced me as, this is Dr. Andrea Neal. She's a broken scientist. Completely mortified, but today I own that badge. I love that badge. I love that I'm broken. I love that I'm different. I love that I look at things in unique ways. And I love that I can communicate with people so that I can translate my passions so that they can understand them. And from that work with Jean-Michel, I ended up doing some very strange things. I went across both the Pacific and the Atlantic, and I did marine litter research and did about 9,000 nautical miles of open ocean research on marine litter. Led the teams, put the money together, got people from all the different universities and organizations to work together, even the California EPA, which that's quite a feat to have them on board. I've been involved with UN projects. I've just been asked to be on a board of a foundation in Okinawa, so I'll be back there again next year, which will be really fun. And I've been to DC, I've been lobbying, I've put together community efforts in Ventura and in Ojai, where we've celebrated the World Oceans and World Ocean Day. And I've also been in business. So for me, it's really important that my nonprofit goals mix with for-profit ability, which means, is it going to be economically stable to do the goals that I'm asking for? And so that's something I've gotten pretty good at. And so all of my future projects that I've been working on have the ability to be economically stable, which I think is really important for things to have longevity. About a month ago, the Ocean and Cryosphere report from the IPCC came out. And it's one of the hardest documents I've ever read. I'm a long distance runner, so I read it at 6 in the morning, and then I went for a run and I cried for 3 hours while I was running. So if you saw that crazy woman running through town that was crying, that was me. Yeah. But the report is really solid. It was put together by over 104 scientists from 36 different countries and almost was backed by 7,000 publications. So when you talk about rigidity and understanding something and the amount of effort that was put into this document, this is not fluff. This is what we're heading towards. So before the IPCC report came out on oceans and cryosphere, there was a report that came out earlier this year that talked about 1 million of the planet's 8 million species are threatened with extinction by humans. That is within our lifetime. So you think about things that are really important, like bees. And I was in Sweden this summer, and I went running, and I had to stop because I heard insects. I haven't heard insects in mass in years. And it was the most amazing sound to just sit and listen to them. And I took out my cell phone and I took pictures and video of insects. So if you can imagine, like we definitely are seeing within our lifetime these impacts that we're having on species. Sea level rise. So before the IPCC report came out, I wanted to put this one up. They said that sea level rise could be expected to be as much as 2 meters, which would result in 1.7 million kilometers squared of lost land. Basically, all of our island nations underwater, and all of our coastal areas very deep underwater, and mass amounts of storm surges and things that would prevent us from living in coastal regions. So in the IPCC report, the red section here is if we do nothing, which is actually currently where our country is headed. The blue is if we do everything in our power to make change now. So 2 meters of sea level rise is right here. We are projecting towards 4 to 5 meters, not feet, meters. When I look for property now and I look for places for my company, I do not look coastally. I look as far up as I can away from coastal environments. And it's because it won't be economically viable to maintain a business in coastal regions. So, thinking about some of those things. Ocean oxygen levels. So one of the older studies talked about the tropical regions have dropped by 40% in the last 50 years. Well, on top of the ocean oxygen levels in the first 1,000 meters dropping drastically, we also have an increase in ocean acidification that's occurring at the same time. And the ocean has been a massive sink for heat and for carbon dioxide. And it's almost at its capacity for that. So when we talk about changes in ocean oxygen levels, a lot of species can't handle if the oxygen drops too much. We can't handle it. So you'll have massive die-offs from lack of oxygen. You'll also have crustaceans and other marine animals that can't make their shells because the ocean is too acidic. You have massive die-offs of all the coral reefs, which we see across the world already. One of my earliest dives, I was in the Florida Keys, and the dive captain, and I was working on a scientific crew, he was so excited for me to go to this coral reef. He said, "It's the most amazing coral reef you'll ever dive on." I dove down, and the entire reef was dead. That was my first introduction into how fast things are changing. And I realized at that moment, I had to be part of the change. I had to make a difference. So I don't want to scare you too much about those, but I just want you to know that this is here and this is real. Heat waves. Since 1993, the rate of ocean warming has more than doubled. Most fish species cannot handle more than 1 degree Celsius of change per day. So what that means is when we have these massive heat events, we're also going to have massive die-offs of species and sometimes extinction events. So our food is going to get very, very scarce. On top of that, phytoplankton, which is producing a majority of the world's oxygen, can't handle these stresses either. So we are already seeing a massive decline of our phytoplankton species that are being impacted by different chemical contaminants and by ocean issues and acidification. So the very air that we breathe is at risk. So these are not extreme. This isn't a science fiction novel. This is reality and real scientific data. Last, which has been my field, is looking at plastic leachates. So looking at phthalates that are coming out of plastics. And they are impacting the very pathways for oxygen production in phytoplankton. So we think about that. We have all these other stressors on our oxygen-producing critters. And then on top of that, we've got plastic that is choking them and also choking the ability for us to get oxygen. And then we have population. Okay, everyone, stop reading. Not really, but we should have careful choices about what our future is going to look like. I know a lot of younger people, younger than me, are making those decisions and even thinking about whether they want to have kids. And it's a very real question. The unfortunate truth is that as we're moving towards climate change events and bigger ones, that the resources needed to stabilize our communities are going to diminish rapidly. That's food, water, energy. And we as a community need to be prepared for that. The global water crisis. By 2030, which isn't that far away, we're going to have a 40% shortfall of freshwater resources. That's worldwide population. So here we are. We're in a tiny community in Ojai. And guess what? We have an opportunity. We are in an amazing place to be self-resilient. We are in an amazing place where if we get together and we act now, we can secure our water resources for us and future generations. We can secure food resources for future generations. But we have to start planning. We have to start creating those active plans, working as a community, and get together and just do it before it's too late. Because we live in a unique, beautiful place that has that capability. So I did this slide for some of the college kids at UCSB that I'd given a talk to. And do you ever feel like you're in an apocalyptic novel? And so I called my book Warnings, What Happens When You Ignore Nature and Scientists. And it sounds funny. I was at a meeting with Chris the other day, and we were talking about branding. And I was like, well, you don't want to brand yourself too smart because people don't trust scientists. And everyone looked at me. But it's true, we have to be relatable in that way, but I think a lot of scientists who work in this field and have been doing decades of studies on this and are seeing the world collapse around them are feeling like people aren't listening. And I would agree with that. It's hard information to take in, and there's so many things going in our lives. I have a young child, I totally understand that. There's a million things coming at us every day. But it is worth our time to take in some of this information, have a little grief about the information, put it aside, and then put our work boots on. And as my grandmother would say, she said, all right, Dre, it's time to put your big girl panties on. So.
Is that a real photo?
Actually, yeah, this is a real photo. Yeah. This was Northern California last year. So as I said, I do everything now pretty much through a for-profit thought process. And so my current company, which we've been around for about 3 years, Primary Water Resources, we have been mapping all of the groundwater alluvial aquifer systems throughout the southwestern United States with the intent to help to secure these water resources for us and future generations. If we don't know where the water is, we can't systematically work with it, extract it, understand if we're taking a safe yield of it, using it responsibly, making sure it's not impacting any surface flows. So it's really important for us to understand the very basics. And what that means is I've had to learn a new field. I've had to become a geologist. So one of the earlier slides, and I forgot to read the top part of it, but when I got my PhD, I was on cloud 9. I was really feeling very good about myself. I just had one of my biggest heroes, Robert Schlegel, who is the head of chemistry at Penn State. He was my opponent. And I had answered all of his questions, and I was feeling very, very good, as high as I could. And my dad came up to me, and he said, "Congratulations, you now have a license to learn." And I went, "Okay. Yep, that's right." But you know what? Those were the most important words he could have ever said to me, because I think about that all the time. When something's tough or something's new, oh yeah, I have a license to learn. I can do this. I can sit down and put these pieces together. So we do consultings, we work with communities and cities coming up with solutions for them on their water issues. We work with agricultural producers, and we also do secondary uses for that water. And we try to create for-profit business organization around it so it may remain secure and sustainable. So California's water supply. We have imported water supplies in the San Joaquin Bay Delta, the Colorado River. We have local supplies in the form of surface water, groundwater, recycled water, stormwater capture, and then our coverage of ice up in Northern California. One of the things that they showed in the documents from the cryospheres in the ocean was in the last 5 years that those cryosphere coverings have reduced by 90% and continue to be reduced that much every year. So we can no longer rely on that ice coverage to supply a steady state of water for us. Additionally, the State Water Project is a really fragile system. So they predict if there's a large earthquake on the San Andreas Fault of 7.5 magnitude or higher, that it could sever this State Water Project for up to 2 years. They expect that it will shift the land so much they won't be able to rebuild for up to 2 years. We're lucky. We're not on the state water supply here in Ojai. But other communities who are completely reliant on it, which is about 70% of Southern California, are going to be in real trouble. I kind of compare it if I'm thinking about my novel. We have a giant earthquake, and then all of a sudden, zombies from Los Angeles are coming into our valley. So, trying to put a little humor into it, but I think about that. And we just had that very large earthquake in Ridgecrest, and the Garlock Fault, which was activated with that, shifted, and it hasn't shifted in 500 years. So they expect that there could be a very large earthquake that happens on the Garlock Fault that will activate the San Andreas Fault. So it's not too far off in the near distant future that we may have to actually think about all of the people in Southern California wanting and looking for water supply. More about the State Water Project. Probably some of you don't know this water that supplies 70% of Southern California, it travels almost 700 miles. And one of the most expensive things in water is moving water. So if we think about energy production and energy supply and how critical that resource is for us in times of climate change, moving water over those great distances doesn't make a lot of sense. And what we should be doing is looking at local supplies that can deliver that resource closer to home. Economic impacts. Agriculture production in California is a $42.6 billion industry. There's other $100 billion of related activities. We think about home values if there's no water. We think about fire risk. We think about medical facilities without water resources. Education. If there's no water at schools, how are our kids going to go and learn? And cities themselves will rely on their economic stability, on their ability to be able to secure food, water, and energy. So it is within our city's best interest and with our community's best interest, both from a viability standpoint and an economic standpoint, to secure those resources before we're in a desperate need for them. So the Ojai Valley is a really interesting, beautiful place when we talk about water. Some of you guys may know a little bit about it, but we extract about 5,000 acre-feet a year annually, which is a lot less than we do produce in this region. The other things that are really interesting that maybe you should look up a little bit is some of the infrastructure in the area and who manages what. So one of the interesting parts within our Ojai City area is Facilities District 1, which a lot of people who live within the city boundaries paid a bond issue for the purchase from Golden State Water for Facilities District 1. And it's kind of like the unheard child. No one really knows about Facilities District 1, even though it's so important for water transport across the valley. And we have a pretty good annual rainfall, and Casitas right now is doing pretty good. They're at 41.7% capacity, and hopefully this winter we'll get more rain. In Ojai, we have 3 major water districts. It's a complicated story. Some regions in the San Joaquin Valley have like 1 for massive amounts of area. So tiny little area, 9 miles across, 3 major water districts, several mutual water districts, and I should also mention Senior Canyon, which is kind of like the 4th of the major water districts. And we have 2 GSAs, which are groundwater management agencies. We have the Ojai Basin Groundwater Management Agency, which you probably hear a lot in the paper with OBGMA, and the fairly newly formed, I have that actually wrong, but the Ventura River Groundwater Management Agency. So some of you have been probably looking at the papers lately, and the plans that the OBGMA submitted to the State Water Board were rejected. I don't know. Is there a show of hands? How many people knew that? A few people did, yeah. So they denied their water sustainability plan because it lacked statistical relevance. So that tells me we have a lot of work to do. But it's not work that we can't do. It's things that we can do. And water scarcity impacts people. We think about things like adjudication. Look at some of our neighbors that have dealt with adjudication on the 126. And one of the major things that happens when an area is adjudicated, the farm workers are pushed out and development occurs. So it's one of the biggest statistics with adjudication. Water gets more expensive every year, approximately 15% per year. And water varies greatly throughout the state, anywhere from $300 an acre foot to $1,500 an acre foot. So it has high variability. When water is scarce, you have lower water quality. So if you think about a jar and you have a set of contaminants in it, if you have water as it decreases and it just evaporates, the amount of contaminants that were in that jar remain the same. So you have a higher concentration of contaminants just because you've had evaporative effects or you don't have as much water there to dilute the contaminants that were there to begin with. Higher food costs, all the agriculture and irrigation, water is extremely expensive for them, and it's a high value resource. Loss of land, house values, and impact on recreation. I was camping in Santa Barbara, this was like 5 years ago, and I was trying to find a trail. And I was hiking down, we were backpacking. I couldn't find the trail. And finally we just camped where we were. And then the next day I woke up and I realized we were in a dry finger of the lake. That's why we missed our trail. The lake wasn't there as a marker anymore for where the trail was. So even Governor Gavin Newsom is trying to put in executive orders to create water security in California. And he's looking at water demands, current and future, water quality of aquifers, rivers, lakes, and beaches, so both groundwater and surface water flows. He's looking at how climate change will impact these resources. He's looking to expand the state's drinking water program to ensure everyone has water. But that is a very slow process, as you probably have guessed. Water policy programs and investment. And I added 2 stars of things that they really should have thought about, which is where is water generated and where does it go? Because if we don't know where it comes from and we don't know where it goes, how are we supposed to make plans around it? So it's just something I added in there. And how much water can be safely taken. And so I'll show you some tools later on tools that we've found from some of our colleagues that can help us look at the assessment of both the groundwater take, but also if there's any impact on surface flows. Because it's really important to make sure that if we are extracting groundwater, we're not impacting the ecology up above. And so what puts Ojai's water at risk? Data, too much, too little, wrong kind. Conflicting data, and conflicting data is not new to this region. It is widespread throughout the state. Earthquakes can shift where water's flowing. Lawsuits, money, lawsuits, we've been sued. Almost all of the water pumpers in the valley have now been sued over their water resources. money for water security projects. It's not very easy to get money for agencies to do this work. Natural disasters, climate change, drought, aging infrastructure, outdated models and plans, outdated building codes, and apathy. So one of the things that we have to take away as a lesson as a community is we cannot be apathetic. We have to be active. So Ojai Valley lawsuit and adjudication, I'm not going to go into it too much except to say that the safe yield within the Ojai Valley estimates are between 5,026 acre-feet a year or 24,000 feet an acre a year. So if we take the higher end of it, it equals about 6.2 billion gallons of water per year that we're losing to the ocean. And I would say that's probably about correct. We see a lot of water that's running underground, and it's coming up through subterranean discharges off the coast. And some studies show and work with those subterranean discharges and monitor water that way. We have not done that on the Ventura River outfall and the subterranean discharges off of that. Safe yield models vary greatly. Sediment deposition, geologists disagree all the time on where things are, topography, elevation, slope, temperature, climate. Even barometric changes can change the availability of gases and water systems. And placing monitoring wells in the right place. Of the 360 wells in the valley, most of our monitoring wells are not on alluvial aquifer systems. So what are we monitoring? We're monitoring either the sides of the river systems, which I'll talk about later, or we're measuring areas where it's just wet during wet years and really dry during dry years, but it's not actually what's coming down through our mountain systems. So it's important to put those on the right place. And better data is needed. One of the things we talk about in science all the time is bad data in, bad data out. So how can we as a community make informed decisions or work together to make great decisions if we don't have good data to work with from the beginning? So that's something I really encourage us to work on. So modern modeling systems do not really take into account what's in the subsurface environment. So the blue lines here are if you go into a normal modeling system and you make predictive maps of where the alluvial groundwater systems are. And the red is where they actually are. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done there. As we get to the mouth of the canyons, they're pretty conserved, but outside of the canyons, then they diverge pretty greatly. So one of our solutions is hunting for paleochannels. So paleochannels basically are old riverbeds that were formed sometimes 10,000 years ago. And what you see is rocky sediment and river rock like you'd see in your normal above ground streams. And on the sides of the river systems where the banks are, you'll see a lot of sand and silt and clays. So the water tends to flow where the loose sediments are that allows the water channels to go through it. And it's not just one, there could be several that happen over a period of years that get covered up on top of each other. So you may have one aquifer system that's running at 600 or 700 feet. You may have one at 200 to 300 feet, but they vary quite a bit there. And these are the things that we look for when we're doing our subsurface analysis work. And we do a lot of data mining. We look at all the data that's out there, hydrological studies, we look at reports. Some of the problem with reports is that they are often handwritten by well drillers. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're not, sometimes they're usable, sometimes they are. So we have to go through all of that and decide and look at it if it has any use or value. Looking at historic knowledge, there's a lot of knowledge in the community that's just talking to people. Where was there a well before? Where did you see this? Like when were things flowing at different times? And then we do hydrology assessments. So we gather the data, we do the initial surveys. So up here you have the initial survey, and then we go through and we make cross sections across where we feel those initial surveys show for groundwater aquifer systems. And then we use the historic data and data that we can collect to start developing subsurface maps. And as you can see here, these red lines, they correlate directly with where we've had our subsurface maps of where we think permeable layers are. And here's some more pictures of some of the cross sections we've done in Ojai. So it's kind of a double blind check on ourselves. And the only real way to know if you're right is to drill a test well. But this gives us a really good indication of where those test wells should go. And then we add on different layers. So we look at how much water is produced in the different existing wells. And then we do some other fun things, like even look at the height of what we have in the alluvial thickness. So we're combining all these data to look at different kinds of models to assess where water is, what time of year water is flowing, how much water is flowing, where are the best fit sites for water extraction that can be extracted sustainably. And then we hooked up with one of my friends, Dr. Mark Cram. And Mark is also an unusual scientist, and I met him at Surfrider in Santa Barbara. We're surfers. So we're also surfers who like to talk shop when we're out floating and looking for our wave. So Mark is one of the most brilliant modelers I have ever met. And his work is used all over the world for both what they call vapor intrusion, looking at chemical contaminants coming up from subsurface environments and impacting people, as well as groundwater models. And so he puts real-time detection systems in water wells and develops these models that can be used in real time and put together information resources for water managers that take months to produce, and he can do them in 30 seconds. What's really nice about this is you can start to map and model what happens over time in real time. So maybe we have more water produced in this part of the valley during the spring, and we have more water produced in the fall over here. And you can start to follow and see where the different trends are for where you should do your water extraction plans. And here's just an example of a similar basin that he works in Texas, looking at one of the time models. A note, we're behind in the state of California and in the United States. The entire country of Mexico uses the groundswell system to monitor their groundwater supplies. So, yeah, just a note. Climate resiliency solutions, preparing for the new norm. I'm sure some of you recognize this image from 2017. I was snapping this as I was driving out of town and thinking I wasn't coming back to my home. So we come to the Ojai Fire Safe Council and fire prevention strategies. And one of the great things about understanding water is it's so closely tied to fire prevention. So looking at water independence, off-grid primary resources for first responders, current and new American Red Cross evacuation stations, which could be at the Ojai Unified School District school sites or City of Ojai sites or private school sites. And the idea behind that is being able to secure water for those locations, put them off grid so they don't have to pay for the energy for that water. It supplies the water for the schools. They also can sell the water for residual income for that school. And then if there's ever a disaster or a need for it, that school site can be a zone for all the citizens to go to. And if we have more of these places, then we have more security. And then if we get really good at placing them around the valley, we can also create perimeters that are barriers for fire. So basically looking at creating wet zones and perimeter zones. There's lots of private landowners that have significant water well sites that they're not using in excess, that we can make deals with this as well. Help with keeping our agricultural zones wet because they're a tremendous fire safe buffer zone for us, and they're providing the food that we need for the community. Grazing programs, which we just talked about this last week and was really cool, talking about having grazers that are continually moving around our community and taking care of all the shrubs and the low grasses that need to be brought down, and water storage. So there's a lot of benefit of having water at those sites and securing it so it's completely off-grid and able to be accessed even if the grid is turned down, which is a very likely situation. So another plug for the Fire Safe Council. You can visit our Survey Monkey, and I can't move it, but we have flyers in the back of where you can do our survey. And it's really important to get the community's input so that we can write these plans around the needs for the community and the wants of the community. I've been talking about off-grid so much, I guess I didn't make that clear. I mean off-grid electrically. So we've been looking, and we have designed systems for even significant size water wells for solar and battery storage on the wells. So they are completely off-grid, and they're not needing to be part of the grid, and they create their own microgrid systems. And we're looking at that for first responder sites, and we're looking at that for the schools that we'd like to be safety zones and evacuation zones. So I'm getting to the circles. So this is the map that you see in the back. And these are some of the locations that I put on here, which are school sites. And some of them are city sites that they own. And then the one that isn't a city site is, because we do need something on the lower region. It's not a city site, but it's a significant water flow site that we could extract from easily. And so some of the things people don't know is that water law is really tricky. And the city has the power, even though we're in a moratorium, they have a power to lift the moratorium within the city boundaries if it is beneficial to the citizens. And so if we were to say we would like to have the moratorium lifted within the city boundaries to provide these water resources for the schools and to help create these fire boundaries, we could ask that of our city government. And I think that's something that makes strategic sense for the community to have these water safe zones and provide significant resources for the community. Provide resources for the local agriculture around the different school systems. And if they were really smart, they could do things like say, well, we'll give you water if you reduce your pesticide use. People forget that it's like gold. If you have water, you have a lot of control. So we have the ability, if we have water, to decide what is the type of community we want to live in. One of the largest areas that we have water that we don't currently get extraction from is right above Lake Casitas. That's the highest production zone within the valley. And then that lower site, I have it not quite where Nye Ranch is, but Nye Ranch has a significant well site on it. That's a hand-dug well. So those are some of what I'm thinking. Creek Road is one of the ones that has a lot of water wells on it and has significant water going through the San Antonio Creek aquifer system there. But I haven't quite figured out that portion of it yet.
We haven't talked about ocean waters. There is so much of it. What are the possibilities?
So one of the problems with desalination systems is they need a tremendous amount of energy. There are some where they're looking at taking deep ocean systems and using changes in ocean temperature to pull up the water supply and to do the filtration systems. The problem is that the water in the ocean is becoming more uniform, which is also a bad thing for ocean currents. So they're predicting with the oceans and cryospheres that not only will we have a mass mixing of ocean temperatures from surface down to deep, deep ocean environments, we are actually going to start losing our ocean currents, which transport nutrients all across the ocean. So there's a lot of changes that are going to happen. And that's part of why I was crying for 3 hours after reading the document. To give you an idea of what a plan like that looks like, they're not crazy expensive when we talk about security for fire in the valley. The wells with the infrastructure themselves is about a $2.3 million project. The analysis for the mapping is about $200,000. Long-term monitoring hardware is about $120,000. And the groundswell sustainability platform, which allows us to look at not only subsurface but surface flows and making sure we're not impacting them, and also have automated shutoff valves if any of the wells are impacting surface flows. That's another $250K for the use of that program. So in terms of monetary needs, it's not huge when we talk about safety of our region. So ModFlow now currently is a predictive program that they're using that it's very square. It doesn't fit the actual curvatures of where things are. So Dr. Cram has been working with UCSB to develop these new algorithms that not only take in place the real curvatures and the real contours of the regions they're looking at, but also take into account things like climate change and the speed of climate change into their models for safe yield assessments. And that's really important. Things are not changing by the decade anymore, they're changing by the year. So we really have to have quick response on data. Some of the things that we've been working on, we've been writing articles. You've probably seen some of them. One of the most recent ones that we put out was paleochannel mapping in Ojai Valley is worth the investment. So we've been doing these op-ed pieces more as education, and I think it's really important as a community that the community is educated and that also everyone is using the same language. Language is a really powerful tool, and it can be used to either make people think something is not correct, but it can also be used when it's uniformly used as a really good mode of communication. So getting everyone on the same path, understanding the terminologies, understanding what are the correct terminologies, I think are really important for us to communicate about these issues and come together about decisions. I don't want to think that I'm the end-all be-all of what I think we should do. I'm one voice. I do have a lot of knowledge about this, but I think it's important for the community to be educated and to come to a consensus on what we want to do. We have really important decisions coming in front of us. And if we don't think about it as a community and we don't think about it together, we're going to be behind the ball. Something we don't talk about is water and as a socio-economic issue for housing. But any new development project for low-income housing or housing that's affordable, they need will-serve letters for water, and it's really tough to get those. That's almost, it's one of the inhibiting factors of low-income housing. So we are required to have 371 new homes within the city of Ojai. But a lot of people who work with our children, who support our school systems, don't have economic viability to live in this region because it's so expensive. And I think low-income housing is an opportunity to also improve building codes and building structures so that we have higher sustainability standards. So one of my thoughts is the ability to create some language in building codes requiring new developments to have black water reclamations on multi-housing units. They do this in San Francisco, why can't we? Gray water reclamation, ocean-friendly and fire-friendly garden and landscaping, water reduction measures, low-flow toilets, smart irrigation, rain capture, and make the measurements to allow for water wells when there's an alluvial paleochannel on the site, and put well infrastructure so that they can be grid independent, because water is really expensive when you're trying to make those bills and you can't, am I going to pay my water bill? Am I going to feed my kid? That can be a really big conversation for someone. And so if you take that bill off of their plate, that can be a really big deal to support the occupants fully. But if they do that, they have to be part of the fire safe plan, meaning that water is available if needed by the community in terms of disaster, and make it off grid, once again, independent of the electrical supply. And so I think we do have an opportunity through new developments and low-income housing to put these structures in place, but these are community-based conversations we have to have. So some of the other fun things that we're starting to do that are around water here is we're at the end of our first round of capital raise for the Aurea Center, which is an environmental technology center that's going to be run by Dr. Gordon Neal. And we have 3 of our first technologies that we're going to be pulling into that center that are all based around water. One is a bioremediation system using microbes to clean up water supply. The next is a filterless filter system that we call the Gordon filter, and the other is a real-time detection system for environmental contaminants. And what's important about this is we want Ojai not to only be completely self-sustaining, but to be the forefront of movement and of change, and to be the place where people are coming for the new ideas and the new ways to do things. So this is really exciting to us. We've been working on this for many, many years now. And so if you have questions after, you can talk to Gordon about the new center. The idea behind it is not to bring all of these to develop into new businesses. The idea is actually to bring them into a space where we can enter them to market either with sale or into licensing. So it's 3-year turnarounds on every new technology. And the idea behind that is to quickly innovate, put money back into innovators, and to get it out onto the marketplace so that people can use it, and not have it tied up with scientists or engineers who want to learn business. Because sometimes that's not our space. Our space is as inventors and solution makers. So I'm really excited about it, and I think that's one that will be really good. Another one that we've started here is Bring Back the Blue program. And this is a plastic offsets program. It's similar to carbon offsets, also has blue carbon offsets associated with it. And so some of what I would like to ask our city of Ojai is to be both plastic and carbon neutral. That would be really cool if our community was doing that step. Yeah. So that program, we already have 44 tons of offsets we can sell. So we've been working with Mary Crowley, who I did Project Kaisei with in 2009. And this summer, she did a really innovative program that occurred because of our 2009 expedition. In the middle of the Pacific, we were trying to pull up this very, very large derelict net. And I don't mean nut, I mean net. And we were in the water for an entire day with dive knives, the science team cutting this net into half, and it was devastating. It had all this marine life in it, had fish that had died in it. It was really needed to come out of the ocean because it was such a danger. And by the end of the day, we'd been 8 hours in the water. So imagine 8 hours, 3,000 nautical miles offshore, nothing out there, just the boat, us, and the net. And we the daylight was ending, so we came on the ship, and we tried to bring it onto the ship, and it was all hand rigging on the Kaisei, which is a big, tall sailing vessel. It's a tall ship, and we couldn't do it. So the captain of the ship, he made an executive decision, and he took the risk, and we pulled it up to the side of the vessel, and he took a blowtorch to it. And that's how we got it up. But what it came to was 2 problems. One is, how do you detect where these nets are? And the other is, how do you pull them into the vessels and sailing vessels? So she brought on board sailing vessels that have the right rigging and have the right framing to pull up very large, heavy objects. And then the other thing she did is she developed satellite tags that would go out on all of these nets. So she put them out with all the fishermen and people she knew in the ocean community. Every time they came across a net, they tagged it. So they tagged enough to get 44 tons out this summer, and next year they predict now, I thought they were going to do 250 tons, but now they're announcing 400 tons of removal in this next summer expedition. So we would like to sell all those offsets so that people can become plastic neutral. The money from it goes into several places, one of which is looking at plastics to energy programs, so looking at pyrolysis and diesel fuel production from plastics, community-wide, not large, not statewide, but community-based systems like that. Take back programs for fishermen, so if they go out and they can't get fish anymore, then they can come back with the plastic and they can put that into supplying money to pay back all of their crew if they don't have any fish, which is very likely in the near future to be more frequent to happen. And then the other is marketing, so people get the message, hey, we gotta stop using this stuff. So we're really excited about it. Meg, who's here with me today, has helped me build this program. And we're very excited about it. There's one slide I forgot to put in, which is we've also been raising money to put a recirculating sustainable shrimp, algae, and bivalve farm in Ojai. So protein security is one that I'm really interested in. And so when I think about water, I think about food, water, and energy. And I think we really need to secure all those things for our community. And if anyone out there is a dairy farmer, I'm sure my son would be very happy to add that to the mix too, because he loves milk. They're not tagged with anything. They leave them, and they're heavy, so they take up gas to pull them back when they're not of use anymore. You have to remember the open ocean is really open. When you're 3,000 nautical miles offshore, you do not see another boat for 3 weeks. You don't see another person. I was 3,500 nautical miles offshore in the Pacific, and I decided to follow a net one day. I was just snorkeling, And I was following it, and then all of a sudden I picked my head up, and I was really far away from the vessel. And I realized I was in some serious trouble because we had not seen another vessel for 3 weeks. You know, it's beautiful out there. The water's crystal clear and it's gorgeous, but it is, you know, it's a really lonely place. And so regulation is hard to do, and it's international waters, so who's going to be monitoring it? So not easy to prevent these nets from entering into the waterways, but this is definitely a really good method and the best one I've seen for removal of them. And she does this with sailing vessels. So currently they use the Net to Energy program on the Big Island in Hawaii. But we would like to up that game a little bit and start working on some of these pyrolysis systems that are already in place and industrially set for doing plastics to energy from creating diesel fuel production. No, the pyrolysis system is a slow melt system. Currently they burn it for energy, but it is, but it's better than the waste material that's building up. Right now, we don't have a good disposal system for it. China has stopped taking our recyclables, so we have to come up with some good solutions. But what's really great is almost like every 2 or 3 months, there's a new system coming out for how to deal with waste plastics. So I think that there's a lot of ingenuity that's moving into the field right now, and even within the next 6 months, there may be a better solution than what I've been looking at. Polymers are ubiquitous through the food supply. It's in salt, it's in all of our food, it's in our milk supply, it's in every fish product. So some of the most recent studies have been showing, they've been doing them in Germany on children, and show very high levels of these toxic phthalates in their bodies, levels that they feel will be detrimental to their health as they get older. So these are things we're ingesting all the time. It's because it's out there. It's in the air that we're breathing. It's in the clothes that we're washing. So natural fibers is really the way to go. It's some of the precedent for the Gordon filter was how do we clean all of these microplastics out of the washing machine wash before it enters into the waste stream. So it's much harder to deal with it when it gets small. Much easier to deal with it while it's large. Cities are starting to have huge air quality problems from microplastics. So especially Paris is one of the worst right now for microplastic contamination in the air. And they've been doing a lot of studies on it too. They've been very proactive about looking at it. So we've had a lot of hard subjects today. And something I want to encourage all of you is if you have some climate anxiety, find your tribe. Find people who will sit and talk with you and think about solutions. And so here's some of my tribe, there's some of my tribe, and there's tribe throughout this group that have worked with me on different projects. And it really helps if we're working at this as a community. When you're by yourself, you feel so alone and you feel so helpless about the things that are happening. But together, I think we can have a lot more impact. So we have mixtures of water. So we have Casitas Mutual Water District that has the largest service area. We have Miners Oaks Water District, which has a small water district. We have Ventura River Water District. And then we have several of the mutual water districts and the nonprofit, which is Senior Canyon Water District. And even within those water districts, they get water from different sources. So some get it from Casitas during different times of year. Some get it from... Oh yeah. So I'll sit with you later and figure out where your water's coming from, but even at different times of year, it will come from different sources. So you have to be really on top of your water supply. This is my family, my dad, my son, and myself. And, I do this because of that little guy. We live here. This is our home. And I really want this to be a secure, safe place for him in the future. And I want us to work as a community to create that safety for him and his friends and his friends' friends. And, we live in such a beautiful place, but we have that opportunity to be the change, not to be pun-like, but we do. And we have that capability, and we have all the resources we need. Chris was telling me about the dairy that used to be here. And how Ojai used to be so sustainable. And then through development and other things as time went on, a lot of the farms that were supporting the region have left. It's time for us to move back to that so we can be completely secure as a valley. The question is about how to look at water quality when we put the schools into place as water generation areas. Not all school locations will be good. Some will be better than others, but some of the wells that I know that are on school sites are not placed in the right place. And so they're off of the aquifer systems. And you can see that if they have huge fluctuations during wet and dry seasons, that's a really good indication it's not on an aquifer system. It should be very steady. It'll go down a little, but it'll be more steady if it's on an aquifer system. So on those sites where there's already wells, we don't need permission. We can move those wells into the right locations. On some of the school sites, the major aquifers go right through the playgrounds. So they're easy drill sites. If you're in the right spot, you don't need as much filtration. You'll still, of course, need clarification, and you'll have to meet state standards on water quality. But there's several really good wells in the regions that we're looking at that have really good water quality and drinkable out of the ground. The group of us that are working on this plan for the Ojai Fire Safe Council, we get together at least 4 hours a week. It's not a small amount of time, and we put a lot of time and effort, and there's really smart people that are thinking about these questions together and working very proactively together. So it's, your neighbors are putting significant time into everyone's protection from fire, and we care about it deeply. The question is about how primary water resources will interface with the tremendous amount of water districts and agencies within the Ojai Valley, and how to navigate the confusing communication between them. Honestly, it changes, and it changes a lot, because we will go in and make a presentation or talk to someone and we'll hit a roadblock. So we have to come back and recamp and figure out a new solution. And we've been doing that very proactively for almost 3 years now. So it's a very slow process. Some of what we recognized early on was a lack of language being uniform across the different agencies. So then we hired a young writer, and we had her do reporting and create these op-ed pieces for us to help educate people on a common language and barrier for what's going on with different things. And so we've been doing that through the Ojai Valley News, and you can see all of the pieces there, or you can contact me and I'll send you the PDFs of them. So we've been trying to do it from both a public communication, but not directly, because once again, most people don't trust scientists. And also trying to work very proactively and do the politicking that is involved with all the water agencies and talking to people constantly. And we've had to give away our data. That's the point we finally came to. We put together, it took us almost $500,000 to put our work together, and we're like, have it. Please use this, because we live here. We want water to be secure in the valley. So most recently, I've seen an avenue for securing water for the valley through fire security. And I think that's a good way to do it. It's beneficial to the schools. It's beneficial to the fire safe community. It's beneficial for us as a community to have those resources. So I think that's the most recent avenue I've come to of like, what's a good solution that benefits our community and gets us to where we need to be in water sustainability.
My name's Ted Moore, and Andrea is my partner. And I'll give you just an overview that and what's controlling here in the Ojai Valley. I think it'll be pretty close to accurate. I mean, there's some here who can maybe chime in if I'm slightly off. But the state of California passed what's called SGMA, or the State Groundwater Management Act, a few years ago, okay? Previous to that, in the late 80s, they established basins throughout California, and they ranked them from high, medium, low, and very low, okay? The SGMA addressed the identified high and medium basins throughout the state, and there are some that are extremely high. These are ones where they've had subsidence, if you've read about this in San Joaquin Valley. The law directed people within these areas where these basins were to create what are called GSAs, or groundwater sustainable agencies. Okay, the Ojai Valley has two: the OBGMA, which is the Ojai Groundwater Basin Management, if I'm getting that correct. Thank you very much. There you go. And the other one is the Upper Ventura River Agency, and that's a newly formed one. And as you can understand, that is to manage that corridor along the river. Okay. The rest of it is the OBGMA. The areas that are outside of it, actually that map is not up, are not categorized. For example, the Upper Ojai Valley is determined to be a low priority basin, okay? Which means that they don't think there's much water up there, which is correct, okay? Although we have identified an aquifer that runs the length of the valley. Some of the schools are interested, and that would be one of the sites where we would put a well up there, Ellen. So the charge that was given to these GSAs, and the problem is none of them were given any budgets to speak of, you know, and the money they get is basically from the extraction fees they charge the different landowners, farmers primarily, okay? And so those are limited budgets. And so they're supposed to come up with plans by 2020, I believe it's this coming January, that sets out how these different basins will become sustainable by 2040, okay? How they're going to do that, I have no idea. I mean, how can they possibly figure that out, really, when you stop and think about it? But anyway, and the Sigma law was put in place because California had really no controls over the basins. They just, anybody could drill wells anywhere, and there are, of course, thousands throughout the state. And so something had to be done, but what I don't know is it an overkill, if you will? I mean, basically they shut it down, is what they did. And in response to that, the Ventura County Board of Supervisors passed a well moratorium, okay? So that's still in place. Both the GSAs in our valley, you know, as per the state law, have to submit plans to the state of California that have to, you know, the Department of Water Resources, that have to be approved. I don't know the status of the Upper Ventura River GSA. The OBGMA, which Dre recently, or just mentioned in her talk, is their report was turned down. I don't, it was deemed to be statistically not relevant. I think our belief about it is that it was just not complete. It didn't look at all of the various water sources in the valley. So we came along, and what we have done is basically identified what we feel are water sources that aren't being looked at. These are paleo channels, or these underground aquifers that are flowing out to the ocean and water is being lost. It's not hard to figure out that water flows downhill and goes out into the ocean. It's pretty common throughout the state. It's what happens in San Francisco Bay and through the Sierras. I mean, there's huge, and that's the whole fight over the environmental, you know, different ecosystems that are being supported by that. You know, do you interrupt that? Do you divert water to the San Joaquin Valley, to the farming communities? So that's just kind of an overview over a statewide circumstance. We have the two basins here in the valley are both medium, okay? The one area that they don't rank, or they say there's the 4 basin designations, but there's also areas like, you know, all the national forests around us are just not categorized at all, you know, because nobody's living there or drilling there, so they're not sure what water is there. So we're simply saying that water is flowing out of these canyons and is flowing out into the ocean. And when you have wet seasons, the water will rise. There's a lot of crosses, of very complex geological formations in the Ojai Valley. The floor, if you look at the subsurface, it's fractured quite a bit. So there's a lot of cross channels. So what we have done on that map that Dre showed in the Ojai Valley is we've overlain that with what we think are about 90 of the best wells, I think, in the valley. And we've used that as a confirmation tool. So basically, the best wells in the valley we have found are on the aquifers that we have identified.
So how are they responding to your information?
Not too much, really, frankly. There's a lot of interest. We've shown it to the city council members. We have shown it to Casitas. There's always a lot of interest, and they're saying, you know, come to us with ideas and proposals. Capital is always an issue, like, because wells, to drill wells, is something that is expensive to do. All of them, all the different water districts have their relationships with engineering firms that they work with. There's a whole industry, if you will, of engineering firms out there. Mark Cram's method, the mod flow versus that's a traditional method of monitoring, shortens the time that all these engineering firms get to take 6 months to create. We can do it instantaneously, basically. So we are not, if you will, we have hydrogeologists we work with and or partners, but we don't have the credibility, if you will, is our feeling. We feel we have a lot of knowledge and something that should be looked at, but there's an openness in some places, and Casitas has been open to ideas and talking about it and very open to discussing back and forth. So I'm not, and it's been very cordial, and we've tried to come up with different ideas to suggest we drill in certain places. One of the problems is the moratorium, okay, that's in effect. The other problem is the lawsuit that hangs out there that we haven't talked much about. But the lawsuit got started with the Santa Barbara Channel Keepers, and this is where so Chris might be able to give me some input if I'm off on this, but they filed a lawsuit against the city of Ventura. It's at least 2 years ago. And it was to basically saying that they're overpumping their wells in the lower part of the river, and it's inhibiting the flow of, migration of salmon, steelhead up the river. Okay. So City of Ventura then turned around and sued some of the people in the Ojai Valley. They appealed that lawsuit. They lost it. They reappealed it, and they won. So they then get the right to sue people in the Ojai Valley. Now, under contract, Casitas is required to sell 30% of their water to the city of City of Ventura. Also, what's going on is that there are plans afoot to tie the Ojai Valley into the State Water Project. It's about 3 to 5 years away by estimates. My understanding is they're out to bid on construction plans. It ties in kind of on the backside of Camarillo through Satacoy. They have to come under the river, okay? And it comes through the city of Ventura. It only is going to provide, it's great to have it. We don't know if it's really reliable, as we've talked about. That connection will provide about 5,000 acre feet, which is about a third, roughly, of what the valley needs. But again, city of Ventura has claim on it. It also gives, because we're having to work with this, I say we, the Ojai Casitas, having to work with Callegas Water District. It crosses their area. In an emergency, like if the lines are cut, they have the right, is my understanding now, to pull water out of Lake Casitas. The attorneys for the city of Ventura and the Santa Barbara Channel Keepers have, so what can happen is that lawsuit goes all the way through, a judge finally makes the decision on who gets what, if you will. That's adjudication that she had up there, all right, which is not necessarily a good thing, really, because you just don't know what will come out of it. And oftentimes you get conflicting engineering firms on different sides of the occasion saying there's this much, and the other side says, no, there's only this much, So that's where it's headed at the moment, except a couple of weeks ago they announced that the attorneys involved had reached an agreement to take, I guess, a 160-day reprieve or timeout. And the city of Ventura, surprisingly, agreed to pay the channel keepers legal fees, which is $850,000, which amazed me. Those aquifers that we showed, they all merge, and it runs down kind of parallel to the river. About the depths are around 600 to 800 feet typically. Sometimes they're as low as they get closer to the coast. They're more shallow, like 100 to 200 feet actually. Like the Nye Ranch that she mentioned, there's a well doing 500 gallons a minute. It's only 100 feet in depth, But, I mean, to get to that water is, with all this layering of legal stuff and Sigma now, and when we walk into these different agencies and they're saying, we're just trying to figure out what we got to do within our timetable, we don't have the budget to do it, and so it's a struggle, really, and there's lots of different silos, as we've been pointing out, of people, and people have claims, really, on it. The other ironic thing is that the amount of fish migrating dray has dropped significantly.
The bottom line is that we're spending so much time in bureaucracy that we're not creating the resiliency that we need to have. And so, we got to put our cowboy hats on, and we've got to start creating that resiliency for our community however we can. One way we can do it is through creating fire-safe zones. And that is something that will be friendly and will be something we can put forward and create that resource for the community. The other part of it is our climate is changing so fast that the habitat for the steelhead trout is no longer there. There's only 500 in the entire southern Pacific Ocean, is what they say. Almost all have migrated north because of warming ocean temperatures. So I would love that we would still have it, but the problem is that they just really aren't in the region anymore. But it all adds bureaucracy and all of these layers of lawsuit and us talking about, this roadblock and that roadblock. It's preventing us from being a resilient community. And we don't have time to argue this for another 5 years. It takes a lot of time to get the permits and to put everything in place. And if we're arguing for 5 years, we won't make our 10-year mark. The school districts are really happy if they could be self-sustaining on energy and water, and it reduces their school costs significantly and allows them to put more money back into the students, which is where we want money to be in our community. So that's not an issue. The city itself, if we ask our city councilman, can lift the moratorium within the city boundaries. So we can create fire-safe barriers within the city boundary districts, even if there is a moratorium. And even in the moratorium, if there's a well on the property but not placed in the right place, we can move the well to the right location. Thank you, everyone, for coming. And we'll be here if you have additional questions. How you can help, you can, of course, donate to the Fire Safe Council so that we can raise the capital, put these wells into place for our school systems. It's part of the money that we're writing grants for. And volunteer to help write the grants, because we need writing help all that we can.